to launch into our questions, I wanted to start with a basic one, and that is, generally speaking, the IDEA and 504 regulations apply to public schools only. Is that correct? And are there any circumstances under which private schools may also be impacted?
Okay, so when we're talking about K through 12, that can be considered true in most circumstances, because most of the private schools are not federal recipients of federal financial assistance. But when we're talking about post-secondary, like colleges, law schools, grad schools, etc., trade schools, they almost always do receive federal financial assistance. Unfortunately, you will sometimes see an intentional, you'll see them intentionally avoid direct receipt of the money to avoid coverage under 504. So like one example that probably people can easily understand is if someone is receiving a voucher to attend a private school and it goes to the parent and then the parent pays the school, that money's not going directly to the school. So schools usually say they're not covered under those circumstances. So the answer to the question is short, kind of true, but not always.
Okay. Yeah, we did have a few attendees here today under exactly those circumstances, wondering if their child is attending a private school with a voucher, would their services be at peril, in peril, excuse me. Okay. Now returning to the point you were making about the about people with disabilities being impacted by the DEI changes. Some people are wondering if there are protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act that would afford some protection to people with disabilities who might otherwise be impacted by the changes with DEI.
Yes, so the Americans with Disabilities Act definitely offers protections. Under that law, a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, and accommodations are whatever is necessary to level the playing field for the person, whether we're talking about higher education or education in general in the case of like a private school, right? So that's one situation where let's say a school is not receiving federal financial assistance for like a K through 12 student. If they're like a private school that's open to the public, meaning they're a public accommodation, like anyone can decide to like pay the money and have their student attend, they can't discriminate on the basis of disability, and they do have to provide accommodations unless those accommodations would be a fundamental alteration of their program or would pose an undue financial hardship. But those things are pretty difficult to establish when we're talking about like very basic accommodations like extended time, private setting, assistive technology. So the ADA is definitely protective there.
Okay. You talked about financial hardship, and that leads to another big question, and that is about funding, and just how much funding for special education actually comes from the federal government versus from state funding.
So unfortunately, I don't have the specific numbers, but in preparation for this, checking with different resources, I have not seen any indications that funding will immediately be impacted, right? So at least for the current school year or next school year, hopefully things are good to go. But even if, let's say, the federal government froze all funding, and talking with my colleagues, it seems that most people agree, or a lot of people agree, that the states would still be obligated to keep up with the programs, right? To keep up with the special education supports and services, even if they're not getting money from the federal government. So that's another protection there that I think is a safeguard that's built into the statute.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think we've done a bit of digging on our end as well. It seems like federal funds are approximately 13% of special education services, and that's a country, wide, so it may differ in your state. So it's definitely not 90%. It is right. It is low.
Like the states would need to make up the difference somehow.
Right. Right. I mean, it is still 13%. So that is going to have an impact, but it's not going to mean necessarily an end to services. Right. Okay. You also talked about the IDEA stipulating special education living under the Department of Education, and the new proposal / executive action to move it to Health and Human Services. You said that there's a legislative process that would need to be followed for that. Could you quickly brief us on that? And my apologies if you did, and how people can get involved in speaking out regarding that proposed change.
No problem. I see the 5-minute timer came up. Can I go back to one of the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think that's just
second.
for our view.
Oh, oops. Okay. So let's go back here to how federal laws are made. We would need for someone in the House or the Senate to introduce a bill, and then it would need to go through this process. So if they wanted to amend the IDEA, all of this has to occur. So there are a lot of opportunities for the public to testify, to demonstrate. You want to show up and do that. For sure, lobby your representatives, make your voices heard, and let them know you don't want them to vote for this. So there are many opportunities to create speed bumps for something like that to happen, and hopefully ultimately stop it from happening.
Mm-hmm. And you did share at the end there some of the resources people could use to follow the news, essentially.
Follow the news, contact your federal, state, and local representatives, see what's happening in Congress, right? So C-SPAN, it's a live feed. See what's happening without it being summarized or without spin being placed on it from media sources. See for yourself.
Right. And someone did write in, you were talking about back in the day that the department was actually called Health, Education, and Welfare. And essentially in 1979, please correct me if I'm wrong, when the Department of Education was created, it split. So we had the Department of Education, and then basically Health, Education, and Welfare became what is now HHS. So
it might have been workforce. I know it was HEW. It might have been workforce, Health, Education, and Workforce.
Gotcha.
And presently, as an example, there's even a committee, I think, in the House that is still Education and Workforce. And it kind of makes sense why those two things align, right? Because education is what helps to get you to participate in the workforce. But right now, just for HHS, Health and Human Services, to take on the responsibilities of Education Department after it's been fine-tuned for decades now, it's kind of crazy.
Someone wrote in, this is like a whole nother webinar altogether, but I will just acknowledge that, yes, the state of Texas just voted, well, I think there was a vote about privatizing all K through 12 education. That is a whole nother wrinkle.
Yes. And, Texas isn't the only state that wants to do that, unfortunately. So definitely see where your state stands on this and what you can do to present an alternative viewpoint.
Right. Again, because if it's a private school that is not directly receiving federal funds, they would not necessarily be, wouldn't necessarily have to comply with IDEA IDEA or the 504. That's correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
for ADA, yes, they would likely be subject to that. But if they're a religious school, then they're exempt from that.
Oh, another wrinkle, yet another wrinkle. Is it any wonder that we feel overwhelmed? Um, okay. We're just about at time. I'm just looking over my notes to see if there are any others that are pressing. I mean, they're all pressing. But maybe if we could just touch very quickly on, I think there were a number of parents of college students here, and I think it became pretty clear that they could potentially be impacted, especially by changes to IDEA. Is that correct?
So if you're in college, IDEA changes wouldn't impact you, but 504 changes would.
Gotcha. Right. Okay. So yes, your college student may be impacted.
Oh,
Essentially,
and also,
private.
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And also, before I forget, just to clarify, even if there are no changes to 504, what's happening with OCR uniquely
Right.
impacts college students because that is, you know, one of their primary means of enforcing their civil rights.
Right. Right. So that's the Office of Civil Rights, which you mentioned has experienced about a 40% cut. And that was just about a month ago. And I think I did see some reporting already of families who have seen, as you stated, that their cases have been frozen,
Hmm.
and very little progress being made. So, okay, well, that is not the cheeriest note to end on. But Mary, my head is filled with information. This was extremely informative. Thank you so much for joining us today and for contributing your voice and your deep knowledge to the Attitude community. We very much appreciate you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to present before your audience. And I will just say, you know, while much of this is disheartening, I hope you do understand that we have tools, right? And we have power. And it's important that we not cede that power at the state level and at the federal level and in our communities, you know, in our schools and our neighborhoods.
Thank you. That is a much better note to end on.